All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I know it's been a while since I've been on your screens. I must apologize for that. Let's just put it this way, and I always say this, but now it's becoming real. There's a lot of work I'm doing in the background. There's something we're looking to launch that is very, very different. You probably won't see me produce as much content on here, but there are changes abounds coming soon, and you guys will be the beneficiaries of that. So we'll share, or at least I'll share, pardon me, more information on that in, let's call it the coming weeks, as I just get approvals and get inputs and all sorts of stuff happening, pardon me, in the background. Now, with that being said, enough of that jibber jabber. Tonight's show, we're going to look at the BRICS Summit that, of course, happened in Sandton, South Africa. That's the 15th such summit, this time hosted by South Africa, which is chairing the BRICS League of Nations. This is the Brazil, Russia, India, and China, let's call it coalition or just arrangement. And I asked the question in the header of tonight's show, the title of tonight's show, are we seeing the formation of a new world order here? Is South Africa, to be specific, because we're South Africans, part of that new world order? This is the question I want us to unpack tonight, number one. Number two, insofar as the BRICS Summit itself, guys, let's be honest, very few people have been paying attention to it. And you know, forgive my smile on this, because it's a weird irony. All of this energy put into the summit, literally shutting down the airspace around parts of Johannesburg, and the ordinary South African is going about their day as if this thing is not even happening. So I want us to at least bridge that gap and get a sense from my analysts who are going to chat to us tonight as to what was said at this BRICS Summit. As a good friend of mine who's passed away, Ian Cruikshanks, used to say, what does it mean for us as South Africans? That's how we're going to approach tonight's topic. And to help us do this, I have, of course, from the Institute of Race Relations, a writer, analyst, someone who I look to really on issues of international relations, knowledge, and the like, Terence Corrigan. There he is on screen. But Terence, good evening.
Good evening, Sita. How are you?
Good, my brother. Good to have you on. Another familiar face, of course, someone who hasn't been on the show for a while, but I know you guys were used to him on Liberty and Friends, hailing all the way from the United States of America. But I think he's broadcasting from here in South Africa tonight. There he is, Chris Wyatt, the host, of course, of the Chris Wyatt Show. Chris, hello. Chris Wyatt Africa Show, pardon me. Hey, Chris.
That's all right, Sheila. Hey, good to see you there, Terence. Pleasure this evening. And yes, I'm broadcasting from Northcliffe in Johannesburg. And for the first time in several days, we don't have intermittent internet, courtesy of a landslide underwater that snapped two cables. It appears OpenServe may have fixed those cables, so hopefully we'll have a good stream.
Yeah, I remember that. That was very annoying. But again, TIA, as we often say, this is Africa. We put up with these things and we are resilient. We forge through. Speaking about forge through, guys, let's get straight into tonight. There are 4 areas really that I want us to discuss, and really discuss in a way in which it allows the viewer, maybe who wasn't paying attention to any of the BRICS, dog and pony show that we saw over the last 2 days, just to give them a sense of what it is exactly that was discussed there. Now, before I do that, a quick reminder, if you're watching this broadcast on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter, do me a favor, hit that like button right now and share the stream after the show. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Chris, I'm going to come to you first, because I think, the first area, of course, is just the irony. I raised this issue 2 days ago on the Vuganazo show of the tone-deaf nature of the ANC government bragging via a one Begitele about how the security is top class, he told us. We've devoted every single resource to providing top-class security for all of these foreign dignitaries who are attending the BRICS Summit, and of course parading that as he did in front of the national media. The irony, Chris, for the ordinary chap who lives in a township, he doesn't enjoy that level of security, does he?
Well, first off, congratulations to Becca Chile and the security apparatus of South Africa for pulling it off. The safest place other than Fort Knox the past 2 days has been the Sandton Convention Center. No doubt about it. And just in case you were worried about it, you had JAS 39 Gripen fighters burning fuel flying air cap over Johannesburg for the past 2 days. Yesterday, there were two of them. It was quite exciting. One with a lovely flash painted of South Africa's colors. Today, there was just one. Dare I say that maybe there's only one left operational at this point? But yeah, no. Meanwhile, just a few kilometers away, literally in Alexandria, women are getting raped, people are being shot, there's cash in transit heist going on. It's actually embarrassing that they boast about this when most South Africans are at the whim of criminals.
It was frustrating for me in particular, because when I say to you, there was no expense spared, clearly. I mean, you're speaking about it now, Chris, fighter jets circling our neighborhoods here in Sandton, waking us up. Goodness me, do they provide a terrifying noise. But I want to drill down on this, and I'll come to you just now, Terence. You'll forgive me for struggling to form this question, because it's one which really, it affected me personally. All through the while that we're seeing this massive police presence, almost a cop on every corner, literally, in Sandton, I get report back from Durban of a relative who was mugged violently, and there was an attempted rape of that particular individual. Again, staying with Durban, albeit not involving family this time, a horrific hijacking incident that saw a cash in transit vehicle, attempted robbery of it, leaving 1 dead and 9 people injured badly. The horrific scene of it playing across Durban. Again, I can go down the line. It seemed as if Sandton was a different reality for the average South African. Chris, and then Terence?
Oh, sorry about that. I thought we were going to Terence. My apologies. Yeah, no, it absolutely was a different. And again, listen, I had a journalist that I met from Serbia who wound up interviewing me because she was curious. But we talked, and she was explaining to me how they've got bodyguards bringing them from the airport. So the foreign media have bodyguards. That's how much of a full court press this is. And why? I mean, we basically heard, Cyril come out and say, please don't rape and murder our guests. He didn't say that, but that's the essence of it. I mean, look, where is this level of performance for South Africans on every single day? I mean, it's pathetic, from farm murders to gender-based violence to township shootings to cash in transit. No, it's a full court press. And listen, when I go into the media center there with my credentials, which here they are right here. So there's my credentials. I've had to show them on average 15 to 25 times to different Metro and SAPS police officers, which I'm not objecting to. They're bored standing around. There's so many cops. It reminds me of that movie. What's the one with oh gosh, they're the Die Hard, in New York, when the kid steals a candy bar and John McClane says, "What, do you want to go juvie for stealing a candy bar?" And he goes, "Look around, man. The cops are into something. It's Christmas." Well, it's Christmas everywhere else in Johannesburg, except at Sandton City, where the big brother's watching, and they're not just watching from the ground, they're watching from the air.
Absolutely. And again, Terence, I must come to you, because that disparity is one which you and I feel definitely, as South Africans.
Yeah. Well, look,
it left a bitter taste, didn't
it? Yeah, look, but this, unfortunately, I think is there's a split reality between what the political elite and what the average citizen feels, but there's also a sort of split consciousness among our political elite. I think perhaps this comes from having a worldview that is intensely ideological. Let me take you back to, I think, to 2009. No, 2007, 2008 actually. I think the sort of tail end of the Mbeki presidency. Remember, we had those xenophobic pogroms. I think 62 people were killed. Something that that in the slew of farces that constitute our public life has been forgotten is that Mbeki declared a state of emergency, very, very reminiscent of the 1980s for those of us old enough to remember it, and then flew off to Tanzania to attend a seminar on the pending United States of Africa. There's a certain sense in which the ideological vision is more real than the reality. This is a country in which a motorcade carrying the deputy president can stop for some recreational stomping of an errant motorist. This is a country in which the police minister can gamely talk about the looking forward to the day when only police and military own firearms, although they're a major source of supply to organized gangs. This is also a guy who never goes anywhere without a veritable phalanx of officers armed with assault rifles, kind of firepower that I'm certainly denied. No, look, there's Karl Marx said something about a history repeats itself versus tragedy and farce. I think sometimes South Africa manages to roll those two together.
Yeah, literally. And as I move us on, I really I'm sorry, guys. You'll forgive me. It really did affect me insofar as it was something that really bothered me. Like one always thinks about it in the context of imagine what's happening right now. And Chris actually said it quite nicely. Imagine what's happening right now, not more than 5 kilometers away from you, versus this bubble, really, of safety. I mean, I was walking the streets of Sandton with my phone in my hand. It was lovely. Again, Sandton ordinarily isn't the kind of place where you generally would be mugged like that, but it just felt like a different world. I felt like I was in Cape Town CBD, if I'm to be brutally honest, and I know I'm going to get flack for that, but really Cape Town CBD generally is one of the more safer CBDs in the country. But as I said, I want to move us on, and I want to put this on screen. Excuse me. Here is the hobnobs who were at this particular summit. Of course, the very people who it was about, so to speak. Just bear with me, people, as I try and get this on screen. This always takes a moment. So one annoying thing about the software. There we go. There they are. I'm sure you can see them on screen there, looking rather dapper and very happy with themselves. Of course, that's President Silva de Lula. I'm probably butchering that, or just Lula is the surname of Brazil on the far left. Excuse the pun. And of course, Xi Jinping of China there, sort of struggling to understand what we're doing right now, as Cyril's trying to grab his hand in the middle there, looking rather chuffed with himself. And of course, Mahendra Modi of India to his right, or our right, rather. And of course, the foreign minister, I think, of Russia. I can't think of his name for whatever reason right now. Over there. Okay, so that's exactly what happened over there. Sorry, Terence, just you were saying?
Sergei Lavrov.
That's the name. Sorry, I was thinking, but nonetheless, they were the key players with this thing. It was about them, Terence, wasn't it? Here are these chaps who come together. The program basically gave them a chance to give an opening statement, and there's some key things they had to get off their chest, weren't they? Let's begin with the first area, which I think is the main talking point, one of the main talking points of this BRICS Summit, which is then it's no longer going to be the small club of just 4 countries. There are other countries knocking on the door, as many as 20 countries who have formally said, we want to be a part of this BRICS Summit. That's a big talking point around this summit. Your thoughts around this? Are we seeing an anti-West coalition maybe develop?
Well, I think that you actually inadvertently summed it up right at the beginning when you kind of struggled to put a descriptor on BRICS. Is this and one sees this in the journalism? Is this a bloc, an alliance, a thing, a platform? Well, it's not really any of those things. It often functions more as a Rorschach test. One can read into this whatever you want. Now, I think it's important to go back to first principles. The idea of BRIC came about from an American investment house, a guy named Jim O'Neill. Came up with this idea that there were a number of countries which were going to propel global growth. Brazil, Russia, India, and China, all large emerging markets. These were seen as a group in the sense that they all had a certain economic dynamism to them. That was it. They sort of picked it up and ran with it. And exactly what it means to to each country is different. South Africa was tacked on at the end. That's why you had Jim O'Neill's BRIC, and then you had BRICS. Jim O'Neill apparently refuses to talk about BRICS because South Africa doesn't qualify. In fact, Zapiro had a wonderful cartoon once showing for the countries depicted as BRICS, and then South Africa as the briquette. We are just nowhere near the same league in any sort of objective terms. But that was kind of the political evolution, if you like. So anti-West. Well, I think it depends on who you ask. For China and Russia, certainly, both for various reasons, want to create an alternative pole, and this is one mechanism among several that is being employed. For a country like India, it's a lot more nuanced. India has very long-standing relations with Russia. During the Cold War, it tended towards the Soviet bloc, although it was a democracy. Now it's got certain things in common with the Russians and Chinese. It maintains that relation with Russia, but also it has a booming defense relationship with the United States. So while China wants to take on America, India wants to develop its various interests. Brazil has its own set of concerns, which I think stand very much apart from the Eurasian powers. South Africa, I think, once again sees this in very stark ideological terms, and it's also become something of an alibi for South Africa. Whenever disaster looms, there's almost this religious invocation. Oh, the BRICS will save us. Consolidate our relationship with the BRICS. I remember also about 10 years ago, we were about to lose seafood export access to the European Union. And there was very blasé, oh, don't worry, we've got opportunity, this is actually an opportunity. We'll sell it all to the BRICS. Yeah, well, it takes a generation to establish that relationship. And, it's not like, the Chinese are simply going to say, well, just give us all your fish and we'll, give you a good price for it. You've got to, you have to cultivate those relationships. But once again, this is, for South Africa, I think, a case of the ideology overwhelming reality. Now to come to your question directly, what does this mean for for those 20 or 40 countries knocking at the door? Well, some of them want to be associated with other larger powers. This, bit like simply belonging to a club. Maybe you use it, maybe you don't. But there's also sharp differences of opinion about who wants whom in and why. So, for instance, Venezuela. Do you really want a basket case to come in to talk about economic matters? Cuba, South Africa wants in. Cuba's an economic minnow. Has nothing to offer. A country like Argentina maybe is a different matter though. This is a significant player. I mean, it's congenitally sort of unstable. A country like Ethiopia is a rising star in Africa. For Iran, it's a case of, well, they're kind of frozen out of everywhere. But then again, a country like China wants more people in because it wants to expand its own sphere of influence. India doesn't want this to become China's show, in which case, for China to consolidate this bloc and have it kind of exist on the periphery and within that sphere of influence. So, well, I don't know. I think first you have to decide what is this beast we're looking at.
And let me just jump in here because I want to bring in Chris, because again, Terence is absolutely correct. The dubious nature of some of the countries who are really knocking on the door, if I use that expression again here. I just want to quickly put something on screen here, Chris, and I want you to speak to it because again, all of them. I think the underlying question in this conversation around who does BRICS bring in and why answers also the secondary question of, is this a as Terence was pointing out, an ideological slant or an ideological imperative rather? Is it anti-West, for example? Why am I saying this? I'm going to put this on screen and I want you to speak to it. This is a piece written by Reuters at the beginning of this particular two-day summit, which has now obviously ended today. Which nations want to join BRICS and why? Let me just enlarge this. Over 40 countries, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Argentina, Algeria, Bolivia, Indonesia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Cuba, and the DRC. A few others mentioned here, Kazakhstan also being one of them. Again, Chris, I'm sorry, man. Some of these countries are just absolute trash in their nature. I'm sorry to use that expression. But others, actually, you might begin to ask the question, are they looking to join BRICS? Because for them and their relationship right now with the West, it's about forming an anti-West bloc. What does that even mean for the so-called West and in particular, America?
Well, there's a number of motivations here, and there's also a number of contradictions in BRICS, as Terence correctly pointed out. BRICS isn't real. I mean, he didn't say that, but that's essentially what he's getting at. It's an acronym by Goldman Sachs analysts, and it wasn't BRICS, it was BRIC. And it was, as he said, to note for investors where the potential growth coming for the next couple decades were. But to be honest, Brazil's economy's double what it was 25 years ago. But beyond that, India's has grown a bit, but it's all China. You take China out, there is no BRICS. I mean, there's nothing left. So with BRICS, what China wants is what it'll be. And they know that. And that's what they're looking for the Chinese here. But let me just share an anecdotal story here real quickly. So you might find it's entertaining. So Mark Oppenheimer and I had lunch yesterday at the Santon Sun right across from the convention center. He came over and joined me. And we left and we couldn't get out of the building because Modi was arriving. And the crowd was cheering, Modi, Modi, Modi. And I swore they were saying, Moadib, Moadib. I thought I was in Doom. Are we on Arrakis? Is that where we're at? Anyway, so that was pretty entertaining. I swore they said Moadib, not Modi, but I've got it recorded. Anyway, so the problem with all these different states is different reasons. Obviously, Cuba is an anti-West thing, but they're also desperately need economic assistance. The DRC, there's a lot of states just trying to get in on the Chinese deal. They want to not have a bad relationship with China because they feel they have to rely on China. So there is definitely China an anti-West thing going on here. And with South Africa's elites. I mean, listen, basically when Cyril talked the other night, I live broadcast that. I mean, without using profanity, basically, told the United States to foot sec. We'll do what we want to do. We're sovereign. Go ahead and punish us. We don't care. I mean, those are my words, but that was his sentiment. You do that at your peril. Look, I'm an American, so people are going to say I'm biased, but no, I'm an objective analyst. The reality is this. Russia is 0.25% of South Africa's foreign trade, exports and imports. China is the largest single trade partner, surpassing the United States about 14 years ago. But the U.S. and Europe are 60% of the trade. So go ahead, piss them off, poke them in the eye, and see what happens. It's not a smart move, but it is very ideological. And I would say that players, as Terence said, like Iran, are interesting here. I agree with him in Argentina, but I would add one more here. There is talk that Saudi Arabia wants to be part of this. That could be a game changer for BRICS. I mean, BRICS to me is nothing real. It's a joke. Sorry, I hate to hurt your feelings, but it is a joke. But if Saudi Arabia does come in, it's the world's largest reserve of oil, conventional oil. The U.S. has larger reserves, but not conventional petroleum. And whether people like it or not, we rely on hydrocarbons. And even when we all have solar panels and cold fusion in our coffee pots, we'll still be using petroleum for making plastics and medicines and all kinds of things. So we'll always use petroleum, and the Earth is making more of it all the time. It just takes millions of years to produce it. Anyway, so I think that it's a question you'd have to ask me which country, what's their motivation, and I think it's a mixed bag of a lot of things. But definitely China is looking for a bulwark against the United States, but it's not the only forum. The Asian Infrastructure Development Bank actually has the United Kingdom and France are members of that. Why? I don't know, but they are. And it is not proving if this is the current thing going to come up? You going to talk about that?
Yeah.
See that? Okay. Well, then I'll hold my fire for the currency thing, and I'll give you a chance to get back in there.
Well, let's segue smoothly into it because it's the next area that I wanted to sort of unpack, because the currency conversation is part of that first question I asked of, are we seeing a attempt here for different reasons, an anti-West slant, if you will? And of course, the currency is the biggest let's call it driver, reason behind why there would be an anti-West push. The idea, of course, of de-dollarization was part of the conversation. And there's really two components here. And I'll begin with you, Chris. There's the first question around issues of trade. The idea that you want to move away from the dollar, and some countries have, insofar as their direct trade with certain countries. For instance, Brazil and China are trading in their own currency. So the Brazilians will use the real, if I'm not mistaken, and of course the Chinese will use the yuan as they trade with each other. So the first component, of course, as I said, is this idea of trade in the host country's currency. Of course, the biggest example of that was that deal signed between the Russians and the Chinese about a month ago, which they made a meal of course, as a way of bypassing some of these sanctions imposed on Russia by the US. Is there scope for this? Chris, I want to get your thoughts on what you think is driving this. And before you do give comment, just understand that the second area we'll look at is the notion of the development of a BRICS currency. So for now, let's just begin with issues of trade.
Well, there are some real genuine trade issues here. It's interesting because in the business summit portion yesterday, the first day of this, when I was listening to it, the Brazilian actually was the guy that was most switched on. He talked about barriers, tariffs and things. And that's an issue not even dealt with here by BRICS. There are formal tariffs and physical barriers and policy in these various agriculture, but not exclusively. And of course, China, which was sitting up there boasting about their agriculture, actually can't feed itself. It relies on external partners to feed its population. So that is interesting. The trade is a real issue here, and it's not a formal treaty. It's not like the European Union or even the African Union, which is again not at all like the European Union. People need to disabuse themselves of that European Union. Those countries have surrendered their sovereignty in many respects to the masters in Brussels, and that's not the case with the African Union. Everybody's got to agree in the African Union, which I think is actually better. But anyway, so that's what's going on here. They don't have these agreements. They're talking about it. It's kind of like a café clutch, So I find that interesting. As far as the currency, look, you go back 30 years, okay? Let's go back 30 years ago. The global financial markets dealt in dollars, British pounds, Deutsche Mark, Japanese yen, and Swiss franc. Now, today, the only two currencies that are dealt with by and large, I mean, people trade currencies, but it's not in the trillions. Canary Wharf and East London is the largest financial center in the world, even bigger than New York. More money, trillions of dollars moves through those banks and facilities every single day, but it's dollars and euros, and mostly dollars, about 85% dollars. And the same with trade. People trade in dollars, and petroleum is sold in dollars. Listen, I'm an American, so people are going to say I'm biased. But the reality is this. You want to replace a dollar, you got to have something that people are going to have faith and confidence in. By the way, that might not be the dollar for much longer. Our credit rating, like South Africa's, was downgraded from AAA to AA+. That's a shocking development for me. But I actually made some money because I have some U.S. bonds, and they were cheaper when I bought them. Anyway, so here's the thing. Saying you're going to have a currency is one thing. Actually implementing and getting people to buy into it is quite another. So the Chinese currency, according to the International Monetary Fund, the renminbi or yuan, is convertible. But that's a joke. Nobody trades in that currency. Nobody uses it. The Chinese buy U.S. bonds and U.S. Treasury notes. So that's where they park their cash, not in their own currency. So if you have the second largest economy in the world, which has grown from 2 trillion in 2000 to 16 trillion today, and people aren't buying their currency, yet they're the main backer of this BRICS currency, how far do you think it's going to get in the short term? I'm not saying it can't succeed in the end. You also got these people, it's going to be backed by gold. Give me a break. From who? China is the world's largest gold producer, but they're not going to use their gold to back their currency. And Russia's a large gold producer too. South Africa isn't also ran. Sorry, folks, you were number one for a century, but South Africa runs 6th to 10th annually in gold production. It's so far down in the rand. It costs so much. The mines are in bad shape. So the point here is that it has to be backed by confidence. And you have confidence in a totalitarian fascist state that harvests the organs of Uyghurs and enslaves them, and also uses unfair trade practices. And once you get past 50 kilometers of the coastal cities, it's a desolate wasteland. There is no economy beyond that. I'm embellishing, but I think you get my point here. China's not a good bet. Its economy is imploding, and it's got an ecological disaster.
Well, it's
China. So I don't see this BRICS currency going anywhere in the short term.
Sorry, you cut, so I thought you'd finished. No, it's worth saying here, Terence, as I come to you. And again, Chris has already broached the issue, so I'll have us also talk about it. There is something to be said about two areas that I want you to touch on, Chris. Terence. Trade, number one. It's very funny for me to watch BRICS talk a lot about, we're going to form this bloc, yada, yada, yada. But there are basic things that are just not even in place. Like if I was a businessman here in South Africa wanting to do business in India or Brazil or China, I don't even have preferential access by way of visas
Yeah.
to these countries. Basic things like this, and yet we're being told that this is a wonderful new bloc that's going to form a new world order. I mean, that's the one area I wanted to touch on. Just the implementation of any policy that they talk about is just nowhere near realistic. And whilst you're at it, let's actually talk about that issue of the alleged developments of a BRICS currency, some even citing that it should be backed by gold. I know Chris has just given his view on this, but your take on these both these issues?
All right. Well, okay. First of all, I think this is the kernel for me, that this is not a bloc. It's not an alliance. It's not a common market. Sorry, and it stuns me how people who should know better often present it in those terms. Some years ago, there was a piece I remember reading where Daniel Zilke, the prominent futurist, was saying, well, we're part of this group, and this is where all the investment's going to come. This isn't. It's not like we're across the pond from China, and it'll just spill over and we'll catch it or whatever. No, we are different geographical localities. Here's something else. South Africa actually is part of a number of development or trade blocks. The Southern African Customs Union, the world's oldest, by the way. I mean, that is actually a sort of economic area. A lot of the customs revenues we collect in South Africa are actually distributed to countries like Namibia and Eswatini or whatever. That is something that is real. We're also a member of the Southern African Development Community. Not so real, but it does have it does have an infrastructure. There is nothing, repeat, nothing. Everyone, please understand this. Nothing comparable with BRICS. Does not exist. Now, as far as the currency goes, yes, just over the last year, there's been a big issue between Russia and India, and I emphasize these are countries that actually have quite deep and long-standing historical ties. I think about half of India's defense spending is with Russia. But because of the whole sanctions thing, they've got a bit of a problem. And they also very sensitive to annoying their new friends, the Americans. So what they've done is they've said, okay, well, we'll pay you in rupees, but the Russians don't buy enough stuff from India for those rupees to be worth anything. So what they're doing is we'll go to the UAE and use dirham. In the meantime, there's also like billions of sort of Russian lucre sitting in Indian banks in rupees that are frustratingly unable to be accessed if you're Russian. The Russians would be okay with using the Chinese yuan, but the Indians also aren't so keen on that. Whereas the Russians and the South Africans will talk the big geopolitical thing, which is, I think, very much part of the anti-Western agenda of a BRICS currency. The Indians are saying, well, let's trade in our own currencies, which you can do if you're ordering stuff from Brussels, you'll pay in euros. But then again, the euro is a respectable currency. And so look, I mean, it's not or the pound for that matter, Swiss francs, yen. As Chris says, this is a long-term thing, and my money, if you'll excuse the pun, would be on confidence in the Chinese yuan growing modestly, but this sort of BRICS currency. I mean, it's as ridiculous as an idea. Remember the late Colonel Gaddafi wanting to declare the United States of Africa. Just Soma one day. Let's make this happen.
Very popular though, with ultra left nationalist types. I mean, the EFF types were like, "Yeah, let's totally do this, eh?"
Yeah, well,
actually, African countries themselves were like, "What? No, I don't trust the guy next to me right now."
Okay, it's the kind of thing that sounds good as a sort of cover you buy in a flea market to put your passport in. So hey, I got an African passport, or a T-shirt. Citizen of the continent. But it's not a thing. As the youngsters will say. Now, you had another question, which sort of
so there's two questions I put to you. The one which I think you've covered quite nicely was on the issue of the currencies, right?
Right, yeah.
Absolutely. But
So
the other
no, not going to happen.
yeah. The other, of course, is on trade.
Yeah,
me, it's
yeah,
kind of ironic.
yes, no, yeah, no, absolutely. And this is something that in various previous incarnations of my career, I've spoken about at length. That if global do-gooders would like to help Africa, rather than giving loads of money or whatever, buy something made in Africa. And I mean, I've seen up close how some of those well-meaning charitable initiatives, provide perverse incentives. In Maputo, for instance, you can see these street vendors selling football jerseys from European clubs. Apparently, a lot of the stuff is donated, to clothe the huddled, ragged masses of Africa. But what these guys do is they get the containers, open them. Ooh, this is nice, and your German tourist who's in there for the scuba diving can pick up his, a complimentary copy of his favorite team. And what that also means is that the opportunities for local artisanal weavers and garment makers are destroyed. George Ayiti has written a lot of very interesting stuff about this. Africa betrayed. That inappropriate technologies. African people are extremely resourceful. I think often what we lack are the institutions that make modern states function, and there's a whole different thing there. But yes, so if I personally am a big fan of stuff like AGOA. Open markets so that actual goods and services can be exported. What the Chinese and let's say the anti-Western bloc can be very effective in doing is sort of leveraging the resentment on this, that things that can be produced cheaply, more efficiently in the developing world are often barred. Agricultural products, for instance, behind tariff barriers or subsidies or whatever. Now, and that's a real issue. I was once told every Canadian farmer has a cap that's turned up like this, so that when he looks into his post box, he can find the government check, which you can't give to to Boer Johan out in the Free State. But the same things exist in Russia, in China, in India. I see the Chinese very graciously were saying you can sell avocados in China. Now, look, I mean, I know an avocado farmer, and I think it's great that he can now sell avos in Shanghai. But that doesn't address the sort of full sweep of the issues. But then again, here's something else. There's a lot of, once again, this is where politics overwhelms pragmatism. Well, we need to address these trade imbalances. The hard reality is China can do a lot of the stuff much more efficiently than we can. It's also like saying, well, we must beneficiate diamonds in South Africa. India can cut and polish them much cheaper, much more efficiently, much quicker than we can. They've been doing this stuff since biblical times.
Let me come in here, because I think, Terence, you're spot on that. And this was the contradiction of this whole BRICS thing. Because it began with this bluster, by the way. It began with Ibrahim Patel, the Minister of Economic, I don't know what he is, the communist who runs...
He's the Minister of No Trade.
And deindustrialization.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
With South African officials basically saying, oh yeah, they said, this summit should begin that conversation about African countries, quote, no longer being the exporters of raw materials, end of quote. The suggestion, of course, being the rapid industrialization of Africa. Now, quick bookmark. That would be a great thing, right? Industrializing Africa would be a great thing. But here's the irony. It would fly in the face of the actual goals of countries like India and China, ironically. They wouldn't want to cede their industrial base, which is already under pressure, to African countries. In other words, African countries doing to them what those countries did to the West. Let me come to you, Chris, on this particular point. That's the intention within BRICS that no one wants to talk about.
No, it's not. And in fact, it's, sometimes there are artificialities that are put into the economic system. So, for instance, the World Trade Organization had something called the multi-fiber agreement, which led to the creation of several 100,000 textile jobs in Southern Africa as Taiwanese and mainland Chinese textile firms moved their production to Lesotho, South Africa, Botswana, even Mozambique. And they came down here and they built these factories and they employed hundreds of thousands of people. And the reason they were able to do this is because the Chinese and Taiwanese were restricted at the number of textiles they could ship to Western economies under agreements under the World Trade Organization. They got around that, and it was allowed because you had to have the fiber had to be sourced from somewhere else, and then it had to be stitched and put together in a second location and then shipped. So for a temporary period of time, that expired, I think, in 2006. But here's the impact of it. Those Taiwanese and Chinese companies decamped from Southern Africa over freaking night. Within 90 days, over 250,000 jobs were lost in Southern Africa. Lesotho was devastated. They lost over 100,000 jobs, I believe, in the textile industry. Look, the industrialization of Africa is not going to happen. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. What needs to happen, in my view, is the next leap forward. But you need proper education, not rote learning, and not 30% in 3 subjects and 40% in your first language. That's ludicrous. Instead of dumbing down the standards, we should be educating folks, and they should be moving to the post-industrial revolution. And South Africa should have experts in IT and in pharmaceuticals and in robotics and artificial intelligence, instead of kids who die in pit latrines because the ANC has stolen the money and not built damn abolition units. So we're a long way from industrialization, let alone what I'm talking about. That's where people should be moving, because that's where the value added is. I've long argued that Botswana should have a pharmaceutical industry, it should have an IT industry, because they have the infrastructure, they have the corporate governance system in place, and they have right of redress, which is missing. Most of Africa, if someone cheats me, I can't go to a court and settle it. I'm going to be cheated by the court. So I don't know if I answered your question. I think I got a little far afield there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I want Terence to have a quick stab at it, and then we must move on because we're running short on. We've kind of run out of time, but I'm going to give us another 5 minutes, if you don't mind, just to get that last segment of it not being hunky-dory in BRICS to even begin with. Terence?
Yeah. Well, look, just on the sort of threat to China's standing, this has now become a big tension between them and Vietnam. Vietnam also, population 90-100 million people. It's in the same area, high growth part of the world. That's also shown that it can drag itself out of communist stupor and a post-war environment, and make nice with their with their former enemies, because as far as they're concerned, the Americans across the ocean, the Chinese have been their problem since the 6th century, and the 1960s has come and gone, along with the bad hairstyles, and they're quite happy to take over to take up the slack. Indonesia as well. So but here's the thing, and I pull my hair out again. Countries do not trade; companies trade. So yes, they can say, well, we've got to address this. Well, okay, is it actually feasible to run a South African company that can produce your widgets or whatever, and then export them to the Chinese at a price that China will pay? And by the way, I'm also not sold on the idea that trade deficits with one country particularly important. I think it's your overall trade situation that really matters. But yeah, if you the state of our logistics network means that even stuff that we kind of have by default, like our minerals, you struggle to get them to the ports.
Absolutely.
Coming back to our first problem, our first part, the security situation. You imagine the kind of stress that puts on that puts on doing business, and you can say what you want about the Chinese. As long as you sort of follow, the rules to the letter, and you don't displease the government by being some sort of civil libertarian big mouth, you Shanghai, Beijing, I think, are reasonably safe places to be. Okay, maybe I don't trust the number, trust the crime stats, but the point is, you don't have the South African sort of breakdown of the state. You have way too much state. a sort of harsh, mean state, but you can sort of learn to learn to function there. So yes, no, I agree with Chris wholeheartedly. Not the failure to produce an educated population that can actually engage with the opportunities, and then we get sucked into all this nonsense about peasant agriculture being this. I mean, really, I spent 3 years of my life arguing why this whole thing was not only stupid but destructive.
That is a topic for another day, because especially in this country, Terence, actually, I'm going to mark that down. It's something we need to pick up, because it dominates our politics in this country. This whole notion of give us the land, as if that is the nirvana that takes us out of the economic malaise that we're in. Guys, we're running out of time. In fact, we run out of time, but can I ask for 5 more minutes? So we can actually look at the individual countries that form this BRICS bloc, in inverted commas. And I want to just touch on them, please, because it's not all hunky-dory with BRICS. I mean, often when the media talk about BRICS, you think of this one sort of powerful monster that's going to take on the West, that each of these individual countries have little to no problems and are just ready to form this new world order, if you will. But that's simply not true, is it? I mean, let's go through them individually. Each of these 4 countries walked into this summit with massive internal issues that they need to grapple with. Russia, let's begin there, literally fighting a war right now, and its leader physically couldn't even come to the conference because the world has literally said, you set foot anywhere where there is the rule of law and you'll be arrested. Chris, let me begin with you, please, just very briefly.
Yeah, sure. By the way, we should come back to that in another discussion about putting 1 million black folks on farms and subsistence. That's stupid. And a go at another time. Yeah, Russia's a dying country. If it wasn't for nuclear weapons and a vast amount of resources, they'd be a joke on the world stage. In 1991, after the Soviet Union fell apart, Russia had 168 million population. It's down to about 136 million now. I'm embellishing a little bit here, but they're dying alcoholics with poor health and run by oligarchs who enrich themselves and no one else. And it defeats having an entrepreneurial class because the system is set up against it. So Russia has a massive amount of internal problems, and not the least of which is that it might not be too long before China starts colonizing Russian territory in the east, which is largely depopulated. So they're going to have a serious conflict issue with China in the next 30 years, probably at the latest. So yeah, Russia's in trouble.
We'll come to that in a second. Actually, not in this episode. Sorry, I'm just reminding myself that we've run out of time. But Terence, as you talk about Russia and even that territorial dispute, I want you to also segue into India and China, because they too have a territorial dispute at the border.
Yeah. Look, this is something that goes back to the generations. Remember, India and China actually fought a war in the early 1960s. They have never actually, resolved that dispute. Now, the Himalayas is probably going to be the worst place you could possibly want to fight a war. But yeah, they maintain a sort of armed neutrality. A lot has been said, about the possibility of a war in the Taiwan Strait. But I think that India and China war is probably just as likely, possibly more so, because it wouldn't require the sea lift capacity, and also it's unlikely that the United States would intervene there. So China might think that it had a sort of a fighting chance. Look, I think of the BRICS nations, India is probably the best long-term bet. It's a free society. It has reasonably robust institutions, although with problems. Its demographic profile is fairly good, and it has a very energetic entrepreneurial professional class. Of all those countries, I think this is something that I've come across. Young Indians will often go abroad to be educated. Most of them will go back for reasons of family, culture, but also the sense that there's
there's opportunity.
You find this to some extent with the Chinese, but I think ultimately an ambitious young Chinese, even if you're not particularly political, you know, you are going to have to be in the service of something that will constrain you. So yeah, Australia, there's a big Chinese population in Australia, for instance. People who just want their kids to be educated there because it's a nicer place to live. Yeah.
Let me come in here because Chris, I think Terence rightly points out perhaps a key difference here. And remember, I began this section by saying all of these 4 countries really walked into the summit with their own internal issues. And rightly we pointed out that some of the issues actually relate to each other and border disputes. But again, we're running out of time. But I want to take a moment to focus on that difference between India and China that Terence rightly unpacks. And I think it's worth another episode, to be brutally honest. Indians, by and large, yes, will study overseas, come back home to form businesses there and to build industry because the society, by and large, is a good one. Let me be quite frank, compared to the rest at least. It's a relatively good society, stable, albeit it has terrorism and a few issues, but it's a good society. China, on the other hand, which is the issue affecting them, and it allowed me to segue to China's internal problems, the moment any Chinese person becomes middle class or wealthy, they leave. That is a cold, hard fact. They leave for either America or Australia. And China, therefore, is struggling to build that sort of middle class base, which ironically it now needs, given the economy there, Chris, is in a lot of trouble. We're talking massive debt bubble stemming from their housing market. And of course, a youth unemployment rate that sits at over 20% now. China walked into this BRICS Summit in a lot of trouble.
Well, beyond that, they also have this problem of too much cash because we've offshored all of our not all, but much of our industrial production to China for a few cents on the dollar in Europe, South Africa, and the United States. But there's a reason why Vancouver is called Hongcouver. Because the Hong Kong Chinese came there. That's before they decamped because they were getting the safety net, got themselves Canadian passports and bought property. And about almost 50% of the population of Vancouver now is Chinese, Japanese. But that's not just Hongcouver. In the last 20 years, it's been mainland Chinese who've been coming there, and so they're the ones you're talking about decamping. Yeah, it's and one more thing about India I'd like to add in there is that yes, the Indians do go back, but because of historical reasons, there's a massive Indian community, entrepreneurial diaspora in the UK, in Kenya, in South Africa, in the United States. We have millions of Indians, and they are entrepreneurs, and they're running Microsoft, they're running Google. So there is also ties there who people have for India, nice leg up, and they've also got some very well-known industrial concerns like ArcelorMittal, which was a French concern. Now it's owned by the Indians essentially, and a big steel company, biggest in the world. And you've also, of course, you got Mahindra. So yeah, but China does have a ton of problems, and that's why they're looking for friends and partners. And the way the Chinese see as a friend and partner is that, listen, we'll help you, but we're going to get the better benefit out of it. At the end of the day, listen, they're a sovereign state. Good on them. They're a sovereign state. If they can get away with it, then that's on them. But I know who they are. I know what they're up to. And so I deal with them with an open eye, and that's where I sit on China.
If I could just add a little fun fact there. Think about this. There's 2 possible candidates for the American presidency of American extraction, or of Indian extraction. The Prime Minister of the UK currently is of Indian extraction, and the First Minister of Scotland. So
I wasn't going to go there, Terence, but yeah, there's a very real possibility.
You see, I can.
No, I can too, but I was just going to let it go. But I mean, yeah, we've got Vivek Ramaswamy, and we've also got Nikki Haley, both Indian Americans. Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Chaps,
and also, as a president. Yeah. Look, I understand in America as let's say a distinct group. Indian Americans are one of the highest achieving, highest earning.
Absolutely.
And as you say, very, very entrepreneurial diaspora.
And very industrious. Guys, we've run out of time. I'm really, really sorry. We didn't even get a chance to cover Brazil. And if I can get you guys to commit to joining me, we can really unpack these and other issues, the other sort of issues I've bookmarked. Guys, thank you. I'm going to give each of you final word. The BRICS Summit, therefore. It's at the end of it, 2 days. Let's answer the question we began with. What does it mean for us as South Africans 30 seconds, Chris.
Did you say me, Chile?
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, it was broken up. Yeah, what does it mean for South Africans? Well, it means that Cyril once again goes with his begging bowl and signs up with his ideological fellow travelers, and he points his finger into the eye of his major trading partners. At the end of the day, China's not going to give South Africa anything more than they have, and that's what Cyril's looking for. So I don't think it's anything substantive for South Africans. The biggest impact South Africans will see from the BRICS Summit is Griffins flying overhead, scaring the bejesus out of them. I'm being a little facetious, but I mean, in the short term, that's all they're going to get out of it. And as you said, I was walking through Santon City, texting on my phone, perfectly safe. That's the other thing to get. So everybody go to Santon City because it's still technically going tomorrow. You'll be safe.
Yeah, that's going to end real soon. But again, Chris, funny enough, just let me get one more little take from you before you go. Maybe from an American perspective, it must be said, the American embassy here in South Africa and the Americans back in America are probably quite chuffed with this BRICS Summit. Nothing of real substance came out of it. And for American foreign policy interests, they possibly get to continue doing whatever they're doing to advance their interests and not have to worry necessarily about this BRICS alliance.
Yeah, I think people overstate Americans' concern about the BRICS alliance because I think I've worked with many people in the State Department, of course, and I think that their view is kind of very similar to mine. But look, I think at the end of the day, the Americans are probably content because there was fuck all loaded onto that summit. I'm just saying, you know.
Terence?
Okay. What does it mean? Well, for someone who's watched South African foreign policy for decades, I think this is simply another example of the kind of loose stool that is our sort of diplomacy. The sort of engagement could be meaningful, but you have to look at it with a clear eye, with a pragmatic countenance, and not see everything through the blinkered red tinted spectacles of ideology, which is unfortunately, I think, where South Africa has become stuck. BRICS is not our savior. BRICS is a sort of is a photo op for an ideologically obsessed government, and if it is ever going to offer anything beyond that, it needs a mindset. So the South African government needs to do a mindset shift and start thinking about these things in a more down-to-earth, pragmatic manner.
Hi, Gay. On that note, I must thank both of my guests. I hope you, dear viewer, enjoyed the conversation. That, of course, was Terence Corrigan from the Institute of Race Relations. Please make sure you look out for Terence's writing that you'll find on the Daily Friend. That's at www.dailyfriend.co.za. Big thank you to Terence there. And, of course, thank you to UBRA Colonel Chris Wyatt, who, of course, is the host of the Chris Wyatt Africa Show. Please make sure you find him on his various mediums, and subscribe to his channel. Chris, how long are you in the country for?
Well, Chile, this is it. I'm wrapping up my Gauteng tour tomorrow. I've been here for a month, and I will be in Cape Town tomorrow night and flying out on Friday night. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss the Springboks game because they started just as I stand in line to board the plane, which is much to my chagrin because I booked the flight on Friday because the game was supposed to be on Saturday, and they moved it. Oh, man. So I'll be back in the States.
Sorry to hear
for
that,
about
but
9 days, and then I'm going off to France. Yeah.
Excellent. So that's, of course, Chris Wyatt of the Chris Wyatt Africa Show. A big thank you to all of my guests. Apologies for the intermittent sound breaking. I don't know if it was on my end, but nonetheless, it is what it is. Thank you for watching. Again, I look forward to your comments in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Maybe you are wondering what was in it for us as South Africa at the end of this massive dog and pony show that was the BRICS Summit. I'm hoping my guests have helped you unpack some of the major topics and issues that were discussed there. Guys, remember to subscribe to my channel and please share the stream as you log out. With that being said, thank you for watching. And remember, as I like to say at the end of every broadcast, never trust a commie.